Okay, good evening. And we already wish each other a very healthy and blessed year. Some have the custom to do so through the entire month of Elul, which is this month we're in now, that prepares us for Rosh Hashanah. And some do it already actually from the 15th of, which goes back a month ago. Anyway, when it comes to blessings, the more the merrier, right? So, why not, every time you have the opportunity to bless another person? You know, we have enough people cursing and enough people giving off bad vibes. So I think the more we can counter that with blessings, the more we can maybe realign the balance. What do you think, Spencer? Good idea? Okay. So we've been doing it for thousands of years, so I guess there's a lot of blessings going around. But as we all know, we could always use more. So with that being said, I also bring you warm regards from Frankfurt, Germany, which I just returned from a few hours ago. I was there for a few days on MLC business, basically. We're spreading, as Leonard Cohen says, first we take Manhattan, then we take Berlin. So I checked out Frankfurt, and we'll move on from there. It's world conquest, right? It's a conspiracy. Which is actually the words in the Torah that says that the mission, the charge that each of us is given in this world is to conquer our small corner of earth. It says, Pru'ravu milus ha'aretz v'kivshua. When Adam and Eve are blessed, and they said, you shall multiply and fill the world, fill the earth, and conquer it. So the word conquer there doesn't mean necessarily with ammunition, with war, but conquest also has in Hebrew the word is sublimate. It's to sublimate the selfishness of materialism and turn it into energy, into a force of giving instead of taking. So in a sense, you can say, to put it in very simple, even in terms that physics uses, that our mission is to transform matter into energy. So we're all given a certain amount of, allocated a certain amount of matter in our lives. And this is the places that we will travel to, the corner of this earth that you'll inhabit, the talents and skills, the people you'll meet, the opportunities that come our way. These are all raw matter. And just as it is with any type of development, you take raw matter and you turn it into something. You convert it into energy. And you convert it into energy where you use these opportunities and all the materials that were given to you, the resources, into something that transforms it, sublimates it, conquers it, and turns it into a force of giving, a force of light and warmth, as opposed to just the selfishness of taking and taking just for my own indulgent needs. So there you have the whole purpose of existence in a nutshell. Okay? What else do we need? The problem is it's not so easy, or it's not so simple. And I always thought to myself, if you could psych people up and, like, say, you declare one day there were 6 billion people on this planet, it's something like 6 billion at this point. So one day we all decide mutually, not imposed upon us, but mutually determine we will not be selfish in any way. The day of giving. And we ask all the criminals in the world as well to take a day off. And each of us are our own criminals in our own little way. So, is it conceivable? I mean, they have the smoke out day where people just don't smoke for a day or something like that, right? To just show that it's possible. So I know this might be a little flight of fancy. Is it really possible? So you ask, let's say, 6 billion people. I mean, you could get a group of 10 people to do it. Why can't you multiply? Remember, this earth is, all it is a bunch of individuals like ourselves, just large numbers. So if we were able to declare such a day, would it work or not? And I always believe that it would work, but the problem is that no one would really trust anyone else. They say, I'd be that way. We'd all be watching the cookie jar, who's going to run first. And so if the issue is really, so it becomes really a vicious cycle. Who's going to lead the way? Why should I be first? Let that person be selfless, and then I'll be selfless. So we're trapped in this world in that fashion. And maybe that's what makes leaders, people who don't look at others before they act, and they follow their conscience, and they have the security and confidence to follow their conscience. So we could maybe say that the purpose of this class is to try to turn us into such leaders. And I include myself, because if we expect more from each other, generally speaking, when you're expected more, you rise to the occasion. Not always all the way, but let's put it this way: if nothing is expected of you, you definitely don't live up to it. When you have a good coach or a good friend that trusts you, and they expect more of you, there's a certain element of pride and other factors that tend to work toward lifting us to a higher level. But we often, as I often mention here, we often surround ourselves with people that are either less accomplished than us and don't expect much from us, which of course feeds our own maybe a comfort zone where you don't have to achieve that much because you're around people who don't necessarily are not achievers. I'm not suggesting anyone is in that department right here. We don't mention names, but maybe out there in the world there's someone like that. Like one of the Rebbes, Hasidic Rebbes, was once speaking at a gathering, and he said something that was critical about a certain situation. So afterwards, one of the people in attendance came over to the Rebbe and said, "Rebbe, why did you insult me in public? You talked exactly what you described was exactly my story." So he said, "I didn't mention any names. Who said it was you?" You know. So he said, "Well, you described it in a way. Who else but me? I mean, it's exactly who I am." So the Rebbe answered him, "Look, I'm like a hat maker. I make hats of different sizes and shapes, and I hang them up on hooks. And then when someone comes to buy a hat, they basically try on different hats, and if it fits, that's their hat. And that's who I meant when I made the hat." So that was his cryptic way of answering, that you basically choose and determine if something fits for you or something doesn't fit for you. And it's always a healthier way instead of personalizing it. So, as I said, it's a small introduction, especially as we approach a new year, quickly approach a new year. And so much is said about a new year and new resolutions and new diets and new decisions and all kinds of different things that we all take upon ourselves. And we definitely hope that God will bless us with new opportunities and new channels that we perhaps didn't have over the past year, especially this past year has not been an easy one for many people economically. Jobs, even those that have their jobs, insecurity around them, what will happen tomorrow. I mean, there are many big questions that people have. So it's always when you come to a new year, there's plenty of things in our mind to pray for. But the thing that is beautiful and also sometimes not so comfortable about Judaism is that in Judaism, a relationship with God is exactly as that word implies. A two-way street. To just expect to come into a synagogue and open up the prayer book and say God will bless us with a new year, yeah, no question, God could be merciful and hopefully will do so without our effort at all. But the fact is, the more you do, the more likelihood that this blessing will manifest. Because as some of the commentaries explain, all blessings are answered. The question is, do we have the containers to contain them? So if let's say you ask for a blessing for parnasa, which means for livelihood, and then you go to sleep instead of going out to look for a job, so the blessing may have come, but you were not there to receive it. Or you ask for any other blessing on a very practical level. You ask for the rain, and you don't have a container in which to contain the rain, so the rain comes, and you can't do anything with it. So there's the concept of a hu yichal kalecha, not just that we ask for the blessing, we also ask for the containers. Or even better, we build the containers. So then when a blessing comes, it has where to manifest. So you could ask for a blessing for a shidduch, for building and for maintaining a healthy relationship in a soulmate. But you could also be doing everything wrong in creating that container. So maybe the blessing was sent to you, or being sent to you. You're not there to receive it, or you're not able to receive it. Which of course makes things a lot more complicated. Because it's one thing, okay, all I got to do is ask. That's nice, but you could also ask and do everything wrong in receiving that blessing. And that's why life is more complicated than just that we get up there and ask. Obviously, as I said, if you can pull a few favors, and you can get God to give you the blessing plus the containers, and you don't have to do anything, God bless you. I wish you can pull that off. But let's put it this way: if you were able to do that, you don't need this class. Then you can just have direct intervention, or for that matter, we don't need any efforts. So I would suggest, I think, that let's put it this way, to heighten our chances as good risk takers, we try to do as much as we can, and of course that which goes beyond our effort, that's not expected of us. But what we can do is expected of us. And in a strange way, even though we may not like to hear this blessing itself is that I've given you, God says, all the resources you need So don't tell me that you don't have them. Show me that you put an effort in those resources. So it's really a vote of confidence. Would you rather hear from somebody who says to you, let's say somebody you come to for a favor. So of course you ask somebody for a favor, you'd like them to just comply and do the favor for you. But sometimes someone that enables you or gives you fulfills your request may also be disempowering you. There are people who will tell you, listen, I'm not talking about now people who don't have good hearts or not willing to be kind. The ultimate kindness is someone that expects and believes in you that you can do it, and will do as much as they need to help prod or to help ignite that spark within us. But ultimately, the most empowering thing that any good mentor, teacher, friend can do is not just satisfy or fulfill every request we make. It's also someone who has the confidence in us that knows that we have a lot more than we think we have. At the same time, you offer to help and you are there to support, because none of us can do it alone. So the statement that Hillel said that is so used and overused maybe, "Im eina nili," if I'm not for myself, who will be for me, is not just a Randian statement of the Ubermensch, of a human being that is able to do everything themselves. It's actually a vote of confidence that God says, I've created you with the tools, that you're able to do things. Do your little effort and I will fill the rest, is basically the statement. And this is where Judaism essentially dictates that there's a partnership going on. So though as much as we would like to be able to be lifted and carried in times when we are in need, often that won't happen, at least not in a revealed way, because if that happens, essentially it can end up clipping our wings, and in the long term may not bode well when it comes to other challenges. And it's no different as a parent, a good caring parent allows their child to learn to walk. So if you observe any child first steps, and all of us took those first steps at some point, everyone falls. There's no such thing as walking the first time, because it's part of the experimentation. So let's say a compassionate mother or father says, I don't want my child to ever fall. And they'll hold the child, taking those first steps, the child will never learn to walk. On the other hand, to just say, hey, to let the child figure it out all on their own and just leave the room or leave the home is equally insensitive. So a healthy parent has to find a balanced approach, which is, on one hand, to be there, show the child, I'm right here. And second, do not stretch out your hands. Let the child reach to you or walk a few steps. That's, of course, the more complicated balance, which is also the balance that we have to develop as we grow into adults in our own relationships. Because the tendency, when you care for someone, is to just pick them up, and lift them, and they're falling, not let them fall. Or the other extreme, just to say this fierce individuality, let everybody figure it out on their own. So this type of dance, where you're there, and at the same time you're a little not there, so to speak, meaning the other person is able to develop their tools, is ultimately the way God behaves with us as well. And that's really, in essence, what the high holidays are about. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is not just, because if it's just coming one-way street from God to us, why do we have to do anything? We don't need to blow shofar, we don't need to pray, we can just sit home or sleep and hope that God in the New Year blesses us. It's not that way. There's a symbiotic relationship where we do something and that opens up channels from above. And each of us has our own particular way to do that, because none of us have the same tools, none of us need the same effort, but effort is required of everyone, if for no other reason, for self-respect, that you're not just getting it as a gift on a platter, that you have the tools to be able to take on any challenge. So that really makes Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur a much more call it complex and also sophisticated experience than just a one-way street. So in a sense, since we have 2 weeks, 2 classes at least, Rosh Hashanah will be a week from Shabbos, so it's 10 days. I wanted to dedicate this class to that as a type of pre-Rosh Hashanah workshop, if you wish, but also continue the theme, because personalizing it is, of course, paramount, and the theme of love, which in a way captures the whole essence of our lives, one way or another. Love, of course, in the broadest sense, doesn't just mean love of each other, people, it's also love of yourself. Or lack of it. It's having a relationship with yourself, with your soul, with other people, with your family, and with God. So the word relationship is a very broad statement, and so is love. So therefore, this month, which prepares us for the high holiday, is Elul, and as I've repeated week after week, Elul is an acronym for the 4 words from the book of Song of Songs, Ani l'doidi v'doidi li. I'm to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. And there you have, in 4 words, what I just mentioned, that a relationship is 2 ways. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. Who is the beloved in this verse? Firstly, it's any beloved in your life, human being. And it also, as Maimonides explains, that King Solomon in the Song of Songs uses the metaphor of love, for love between human being and God. So Ani l'doidi v'doidi li also refers to our love to God and God's love for us. The word God may be somewhat, as you know, I don't like stereotypes, and the word God really means nothing, frankly, unless you really define it in terms. So I've shared the story many times here. So where I was giving the class years ago, and I decided not to use any stereotypical images. I decided instead of the word God or any words like that, I used instead of God a higher reality, or the essence, or undefined layers of unconscious energy, or something like that. And instead of mitzvahs, I used the word connections. Instead of Torah, blueprint. Instead of geula, destination. So there was this discussion I was leading about connecting to the essence of it all through following a certain blueprint and actualizing it and reaching a destination, a goal. And I remember everyone there, mostly people from the arts and entertainment industry at the time when I started the class, and they were like, really intrigued by this. What brand of Hinduism is this? After a few weeks, one of the people asked me, he said, "Are you talking about God?" So I said, "Yes, but don't spoil it for the others." And this story I've used many, many times. I mean, in that case, it happened to be a real experiment, and I didn't tell anybody what I was referring to. You, I am telling, because I think everyone here is beyond stereotypes. At least that's what we expect at this point. So the word God really is a very deceptive word. Have a relationship with God. What does that even mean? So let me personalize it more. Let's talk about a relationship with your soul, with your inner self. Do you have a relationship like that, or don't you? So no one likes to admit they don't, but if you do, can you describe it in detail? Not to me. Describe it to yourself. Put it down in writing. I will say this. We want to have a relationship with ourselves, but how much time do we have to dedicate to it? Most of our relationships are outside of ourselves. Most of the time of the day is busy trying to make a living. Then we have all the other distractions. So when finally comes time to think about yourself, and really you and yourself, there isn't much time left. So even if we want to have a relationship like that, it's not so simple. And then even if you do dedicate time, the question is, what does the self look like? What does your inner self look like? Now that's not an easy thing to answer because we're subjective. So we don't even know what our inner self looks like. This is something we search for. I would say this, most of us know what it doesn't look like. What I mean by that is, we know that when your soul is not being fed, you know what symptoms you have. Anxiety, unfulfillment, all the psychological maladies, all the psychological, let's say, voids. Void is a mild word. It's a lot deeper than just void. Sometimes it's quite oppressive. Are a result of something inside of you not being fed. That shouldn't require any stretch of imagination or leap of faith. Just like your body tells you, I'm hungry, and you know what to do, you go ahead and take a piece of food in your mouth or a drink that quenches your thirst. When your spirit or soul is not satisfied, it also lets you know. It lets you know through an emptiness, through an aimlessness, sometimes deeper than that, sometimes worse than that, sometimes self-destructive behavior, the search for something passionate, the search for some type of excitement. If you don't find it in healthy ways, you'll find it in unhealthy ways. A spirit must be fed, and it's going to be fed one way or another. Or it'll have to become numb, And that itself is maybe the biggest pain of all. It numbs itself and self-medicates in a sense to avoid the existential loneliness or pain that we all deal with. And this is universal to all of us. I'm specifically speaking in very general terms because you can all apply it in your own way. And two of us will apply it the same way. And also times change. One day this manifests this way, another day another way. The fact that days we are comfortable or things are going well doesn't necessarily mean that your soul is being fed. It just means that you have enough distractions to make you think you're happy. You know, you can get yourself busy with real, even things that are extremely destructive, but they're making you happy for the moment, instant gratification. So it's so-called satisfied, fills the void for the moment. Well, how can one know that? Well, give it a little time. That's all you know. Time will tell. I meet people who, yes, for years have developed sophisticated mechanisms to satisfy their own, or to relieve their own pain, and they're not happy at all, even though they put on a good show. But I'm not here to make anybody feel miserable. If someone feels they're getting away with it, listen, why disturb the so-called the status quo? But when it comes to thinking about yourself in a deeper way like that, and those of us that are introspective, and those of us that have been hurt in life, and especially relationships, where more often than not, I would take a good guess that everybody in this room has been hurt at least once. And that's not because I'm a prophet. It's because that's the way it is, the way of the world. So then that exposes that there's more going on in your life than you think. You know, when you're younger and more naive, you could convince yourself, if I had this, I'd be happy. As you get a little older, you start realizing happiness is not exactly a destination. It's a journey. And it's not a plateau either. It's ups and downs. And it's not so much about achieving something like I'm going to reach this goal and I'll be happy. It's an overall perspective on life that if you're generally driven by something positive, that's what creates happiness, rather than so-called objects. In other words, happiness is more of a noun than a verb. And the same as I discussed in the previous weeks is love. Yes, love can be a verb, making love, and people love different ways and their techniques and their methods. And a kiss is a expression of love, as a hug is, and so on, other expressions of love. But a state of love is a state of being is much deeper and much more profound than just a verb. A verb is only while the action is taking place. A noun is 24/7. When a person is in love and is loved, that's not a compartmentalized experience. It's a all-consuming one. That doesn't mean you are with the person you love all the time. It doesn't mean you're always even manifesting it in a loving way. It means that you have in your spirit the feeling that you love somebody and someone loves you. That's a noun. And then that noun turns itself into many verbs throughout your life. Because when you love someone, you'll do things for them and they will do things for you. But that's already the result of a state of being. So I once shared this, I remember, at a talk, and someone said to me, well, you listen, put it this way. I don't have the noun, so at least let me have the verb. So I said, I'm not here to deprive anybody from the verb. That's not what I'm suggesting. Just suggesting, don't convince yourself that that's love. And then when you get disappointed that the verb isn't there, or the person who's supposed to love you is not acting lovingly, don't be surprised because the noun wasn't there. The state of being wasn't there. So the point here is not to say one or the other. We're talking about having both, obviously. And sometimes, however, the verb can obfuscate the noun, so to speak. You know what I mean? Which means when you get consumed so much with a chase or with an action, you can lose sight of finding the right type of human being that you need to have in your life. Let's put it this way: if someone has the pleasure that love brings, even if the pleasure is coming from someone that's not healthy or committed to you, and so on, that can become a seductive, hypnotic force that seduces you and distracts you from what you really need to find. So that's when the verb can get in the way. But again, I'm not here to pontificate and tell people what to do. We're just talking about the subject in very general terms. Like we said, hat maker. We'll make different hats of different sizes, and you fit them and you see how it works. And then you'll know it's for you. Okay? Is that fair? Cover all my bases. I cannot be sued but for libel or for defamation of character, right? I know there are a few attorneys here. How's that, Jeff? Right? Okay. Now there is a guy, a rabbi, actually called me a few years ago, and he wanted to open up a shidduchim service. I mean, he's not the first guy that came up with the idea. Everyone's doing it, trying to do it all the time. Obviously, it's not really working. We can see that from the statistics. But, so he wanted me to get involved. I said, look, I give classes to people. By all means, you have a suggestion for anyone I know, I'll be happy to introduce them. But I don't want to get into the things. He says, what are you afraid of? They're going to sue you? Because he went to a lawyer, and the lawyer says, listen, if you get into this business and it doesn't work out, you can end up being sued because you're like a participant in you made the person miserable because you introduced the two to each other. I don't know if there's any legal precedent to that, but no? Okay. I remember in relationships, once war starts, it doesn't become rational exactly. So anything is possible in matters of war and love, as they say, politics of love. So with that being said, as a so-called backdrop, if we then look at Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the high holidays as a beginning, a new beginning, a rendezvous with our own destiny, so to speak. And this is based on the mystical and also a very simple, practical idea that Rosh Hashanah is not just another day in the year, and it's not even just a symbolic day. Based on the concept that time is cyclical, or more like a spiral, so every Rosh Hashanah something actually happens. If you think of time as energy, and the calendar is a flow of energy, so just like on our birthdays, something happens at that moment that recreates what happened at the moment you were born. So Rosh Hashanah being the birthday of the human race, Adam and Eve were created on that day. So collectively, it's essentially the beginning of our species. It's the beginning of our lives. And each of us individually, because we're not just a group, we are all individuals. So Rosh Hashanah is our collective birthday. In this sense, not just birthday to give gifts and say happy birthday, but birthday in the sense of reviewing what's the purpose of our being here, our mission, essentially. Birth is God saying you matter. So the birthday, a personal birthday, is a day that we reflect upon what is my indispensable contribution. What is it that you and I, each of us individually, what music that we can play and no one else but us. So Rosh Hashanah, in a sense, is that collective question. So being that love is so much the essence of life itself, you could say it's also the beginning of our love, it's the beginning of our relationships. So no matter how old we are, how young we are, Rosh Hashanah is definitely a new door opens up. And as the mystics put it, the Arizal says it, the Alter Rebbe and Tanya says it, that new energy enters into the cosmos that never existed before. So no matter what happened till now, on Rosh Hashanah we're told, on Rosh Hashanah Eve, right before sundown, the way the Arizal puts it in a very poetic way, says as the sun sets before Rosh Hashanah, the entire world goes into a comatose state, anticipating and waiting for its contract to be renewed. And we don't feel it because we don't. What do we feel exactly? But that's the way he puts it. And as Rosh Hashanah enters, it's like a reawakening, or an awakening, but not just an awakening of what was before. A new energy enters into our beings. And the question is, will we be there to collect it? Will we be there to manifest it? So there's no question. So there's no question that something happens. The only question is what we will do with it or won't do with it. So there's an opportunity. So obviously, as we stand a few days before, over a week, the more we know about this energy and the more we know what we should be doing, the healthier it is to manifest it. It's just an easier way to go. Instead of, as I said earlier, just expecting or waiting for a miracle. And we know what Leonard Cohen said about that as well. So you can wait all your life. So, as I said, we'll use love because, as the Zohar puts it this way, he says, Chesed, the Azlim Kula Yaimin, he uses the expression, which means that love brings everything else with it. So though to define life as equals love is not completely accurate, life is more than just pure love. There's a lot of other aspects to life. But in a way, you could say it's all means to a higher end. For us to become more loving human beings is the purpose of our lives. More love, as I said, between ourselves, interpersonally, and also intrapersonally, meaning you and yourself, and ultimately love with God, love with your soul. So it's a relationship. In a sense, when we were thrown into this earth, and I use the word thrown intentionally, we were disconnected. And this is the theme I was talking about in the previous weeks. We were disconnected. As a fish comes out of water, disconnected from its source. And this disconnection, we feel very, very acutely all the time. We don't feel connected to each other. When you meet somebody for the first time, you don't know what they want from you. You don't know whether they'll use you, discard you, how selfish people can be. We all begin very, very independent of each other. A person who builds love in their lives, they meet people, that love spreads, and you become connected with each other. It's called connecting disconnected parts. In a way, when we say Shema, which we will say especially in the high holidays, especially in Yom Kippur in the high point, Shema Hashem Echad, which is the classical and the most powerful Jewish prayer, said many times every day, and even more so on the high holidays. So the last word, Echad, is the secret of all, unity, unification, the unity of diverse and divisive forces. So that, in the broadest sense, is what love really is about. So love, obviously, in a more personal, is love between two people. But the reason we celebrate at a wedding, and you'll see all the 7 blessings, the Sheva brachas, are not about the two people that are getting married. You'll see they all talk about the universe. They talk about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They talk about how God creates the universe. Is because when two individuals get married and find love in their lives, they are a microcosm of the purpose of all existence, is to bring unity in a world that is separate, is split apart. Now we believe, and we're told, that this unity was always there, and is still there right now beneath the surface. However, we don't manifest it, we don't experience it. So our challenge is not just to bring unity into a world that has no unity in it, it's to discover the underlying unity. That would be more accurately put. And today, with the modern science, especially physics, we know that integral unity is the essence of all of existence. It's been proven time and again that there are forces that connect everything. It's really the essence of all science, is to find the unified field principle. Unified field principle, which is one law that connects them all. So at this point, science has discovered certain laws, 3, 2, that connect all phenomena. So we human beings have always gravitated to looking for those unifying elements. Why? Because there's something inside of us, and you could say it's an act of faith, actually, even though for scientists that sounds sacrilegious, that we believe and we accept that unity is the natural state of being. Why is that the case? Why don't we believe that chaos or discord is a natural state? It's not my question. These are questions asked by modern scientists, physicists, and many of them will say to you, this is an axiom that has no basis. We don't know why it is that human beings gravitate to find unity instead of chaos. We'd rather find one law that explains many different phenomena than just to say that there are that many, every phenomenon has its own law. And we all know it resonates within us as well. There's something very disturbing if you were to hear that nothing connects with anything. Not in your life or not in the larger world. So there's something about that as well. Another axiom, just for the record, since we're on the topic in science, is that you always look for the simplest explanation of any given phenomena. That too, there's no reason for that. It's simply because humans have determined a consensus that is what makes sense to us. Now you can say why it makes sense to us, because we're wired that way. Since we're wired that way, it means that we have in our system that concept of unity. But however you twist it, unity is definitely the natural direction where people gravitate towards. Except, of course, the final frontier, which is the hardest one, the personal one. It's easy for us to understand that all the stars in heaven and all the atoms and subatomic particles are some way connected. When it comes to us, because we have personal and selfish interests, and there's a thing called narcissism, it's not that, it doesn't really work that way. In nature doesn't have to be convinced that it's one's symmetry. But human beings do have to be convinced. You have to be told that it's in your interest to do something for somebody else. In nature, no one has to be told anything. It's just built into their mechanism. It's built into the program. And that brings us back to what Rosh Hashanah teaches us, is that we have free will. That though that unity is an inherent part of us, but there's also another voice, which is take care of yourself first. And that's our battle. So you can say the search for our own destiny is really the search for love. In the narrow sense of it, love among finding your soulmate. In the broader sense of it, love and connection through all the universe. And interesting thing, they both lead to each other. If you cannot find love in your own personal life, it's going to be very difficult to find unity outside of your personal life. And vice versa. It all affects each other. People who are fighting with everybody outside of their homes, it's hard to imagine that it does not spill over some way. Because it's coming from somewhere. It's not just, okay, once I get out of my home, I start fighting with everybody. People who are at peace with themselves are at peace everywhere. Obviously, in certain adversarial situations, it may bring the worst out of us. That goes without saying. But in general, it is a so-called seamless thing. Love is that when you have it in one area, love breeds love. People who are in love will bring more love into the rest of their lives as well, even outside of their relationship. And if it doesn't happen that way, and I've seen that too, sometimes you meet people who seemingly are in love with each other, and you see they only love each other, no one else benefits from it. Guaranteed, in a matter of time, it won't last. It won't last because there's something going on even among them that right now, selfishly, it works for both of them. And there's something missing. So generally, that's how it works. Pain breeds pain, love breeds love. In general, all these things tend to either get worse or better. It means that a certain situation, if there's unity in your life, there will be more unity around you. A person who's happy brings happiness to other people. That's how it works. A person who's not happy with themselves does not make other people happy. In the bigger picture. Of course, there are short-term exceptions. There are crying clowns that make a lot of other people happy, and they're miserable themselves. But you get what I'm saying in the broader sense of it. So, with that, I would like to pose a few questions that those of you who get the email that reminds us about this class. So I spelled them out there. And that is, number one, the question that we always hear, or I always hear, is it possible that some of us are just not destined to find love in our lives? And some of us are. Was that a vote about what I just said? Huh? Let's not vote on this topic, okay? Because I am afraid of the results. So is it possible that love is something that's not up in our control? If it's pre-written script, that's an important question to ask, because some of us, just to amplify the question, will say, hey, I've tried everything, not working. So perhaps it's just not meant to be. Not in the stars for me. I've heard this more than once in my life, so I know that there's this possibility in some people's minds. I'll analyze this a little better. And if that's the case, the question is, can destiny be changed? And what does Rosh Hashanah have to say about this? Because if Rosh Hashanah is anything, it's about, as I said, a rendezvous with our destiny. And not just, as I'm elaborating here, as a one-way street that God writes us the script for us, but that we have a hand in it. So that states that even if you feel that certain things are destined, you do have something to say about it. You can't change destiny, and the question is how? How difficult? Why not just embrace it and put our focus in other areas? I mean, the list goes on with questions around it. A second part of this discussion here, being that the weeks that we are in now also have Torah portions. So there's another theme that I want to address. After last week we spoke about traveling inward, intimacy, the nature of intimacy, based on the chapter Kisavai, which means to enter. How do you enter into yourself? How do you enter into love? And the week before I discussed the opposite side of it, the other end of the spectrum, the battles of love, based on that chapter, Kiseitzei l'Milchama, to go out to war. I won't elaborate on that. Those of you who are here or heard the classes will know what I mean. If not, you could always, it's all archived. You can always refer to it. It's all online, available your leisure. So this week's chapter, which is actually the last chapter we'll be reading before Rosh Hashanah, always read before because Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos this year, so this Shabbos is the last Shabbos of the year. So we read the chapters this year. It's a combination of two chapters. It's called Netzavim-Vayelech. Netzavim means you stand today, all of you together, united, which again is the theme of unity and love. And it says in commentaries, Hayoim, Hatem Netzavim Hayoim, you stand today. Today refers to Rosh Hashanah. So this verse is actually a statement of Rosh Hashanah, the unity that is established on that day, the birthday of the human race. And the second chapter, as I said, is combined, you read them both together, is called Vayelech. And Vayelech means, literally it's talking about Moses, the last day of Moses' life. So Vayelech Moshe, it says Moses went. And he spoke the final words that he would say that last day of his life, on the 7th of Adar, the 40th year after the Jews left Egypt. And then the chapters continue Moses' last declarations, basically. And the book of Torah will end, just for the record, we'll read it on Simchas Torah, the end of the holiday season. So in a sense, we're right now beginning, like the so-called, it's the beginning of the end of the Torah. I don't mean that in any foreboding way. I just meant that as so the beginning of the end, the Netzavim-Vayelech is where Moses begins his last leg of his journey. You can see it's quite significant in many ways. Moses is the man of God, and we read it before Rosh Hashanah. And as I said, Simchas Torah, we'll read the end of the Torah, bracha, the bracha, the blessings of Moses, and we'll discuss that when we get closer to that time. So these two chapters, focusing just on their names, question is asked, and I'll bring it soon back to the theme of love and destiny that we've been discussing. The question is asked, the same thing, these two names seemingly contradict each other. The word Netzavim in Hebrew means to stand firm, strong. You stand, Nitzav, Melech. It means to stand firm. It's a Hebrew word that means to stand firm, unwavering. The word Vayelech means to move, mobility. So both are necessary in life, but it's interesting that a chapter in the Torah brings these two themes together. And that's the question, really, that addresses the issue that we're talking about, love itself. In love, which is more important? The firm, solid foundation, something you can rely on, or mobility, flexibility. Now you find, just to drive the point home, you find people you meet, and this can be women or men, that have one or the other. Very rare that you find a combination. For example, there are people that are really reliable. They're always on time. A promise is a promise. But often the price you pay for that is they're very boring as well. Everything's predictable. Like an accountant, like a clerk. Not to say that every accountant is reliable, don't get me wrong, and not to say that every accountant is that way in a loving relationship. I just mean applying it to that, it becomes very, very consistent, like a clock. So a clock works two ways. It's reliable, but it never goes out of the script either. On the other hand, you find people who are the so-called adventurous types, experimenters, bohemians. So there's a beauty to that it's always spontaneous and exciting. You never know where it's going to go, but you also sometimes can't rely on it, or very often can't rely on it. People like that come and go. It's part of their spontaneity. And as soon as you tell them, well, listen, you need to have some commitment, they say, well, that undermines spontaneity. Spontaneity includes the ability not to be committed. Now, I'm sure, I don't know if all of you, but I'm sure some of you have gone through this challenge. And it becomes difficult because can you have the best of both worlds? So obviously, it's a loaded question. I wouldn't ask the question if I didn't think you could. It wouldn't serve well to the theme of this type of class to suggest you can't. And the combination of these two chapters emphasizes that you can. And as we'll see soon, understanding the mystery of this balance is also understanding the whole issue of love in general, and Rosh Hashanah, and the rendezvous with our destinies, and whether we are destined or not destined to love. It's all connected. So, where do we begin? Let's see here. I think the first place to begin is, what is love? Why is that important? Because I can go on here and elaborate and wax eloquent about love from all kinds of different perspectives. And you may even agree with me, but then we come away with it not working in our lives, And usually the reason for it is because our definition of love in the first place was different. You have to state your axioms. I assure you, without even having to take a survey or having everyone here speak up right now, that most of us do not have the same definition of love. What love means? What is love? You know, a person told me the other day, for them love is at least I have somebody that doesn't fight with me all the time. That's for me love. Why? Because in my home where I grew up, my parents always fought with each other. And then I went into all kinds of very combative relationships. So now I just want a little peace. I just need a guy. I don't even need anything from him. He just doesn't fight with me. Lets me be. So what happened in this person's situation? They lowered their standards due to being bruised and hurt. I'm not judging anyone that comes to that conclusion. But that's a whole different definition of love than other definitions. And that type of love, I'm not here to teach you how to find such love. That you can work on your own if you like. So defining love is more important than anything when you're discussing it, because we have different definitions. And that's why last week I elaborated relatively about this, because the first thing is we have to define what is it that we're expecting. What is our standard? And again, I take into consideration that many of us are mature enough and have been hurt in the process. So it's not just some idealistic version that you'll tell young teenagers, here's what love is and all the expectations. I'm not saying that that's even wrong. But you can't just talk that way when people who have gone through it see it's not that simple. So what is it that we expect and what is it that we hope for? And at the same time, as I mentioned, and I mention again, to higher expectations also higher our risks. Because if I expect more and I don't get it, I could also be hurt more. So it's not an easy thing for me to talk about, because I'm not here also, I'm not interested in hurting anybody. But at the same time, we are here on this earth. And I have to tell you, my first axiom, I wouldn't sit here and give this class, or for that matter, will give any of the classes I give, or teach, or write, or do anything I do if I did not believe firmly that we human beings have much more potential than we think we have. So to expose that or talk about that, yes, there's a risk. Because if you tell people they have more potential than they think they have, and they may not always have the tools, even if they believe it, and they trust me and they'll believe what I'm saying, if they don't have the tools, you also can end up hurting people. So I don't take this responsibility lightly. And being that I've been through this more than once, I've seen different approaches. Due to my own experience, I would say extensive experience relatively, and I'm not saying this to toot my horn, I'm just saying really to explain a point I'm going to make now, is that I have therefore determined that the best and healthiest way is not to tell people what to do ever, even if they ask you. You put out there what you understand, or what I've learned, or what I've absorbed and distilled from wisdom that I believe in is far greater than myself or anybody here, that goes back thousands of years. You try to present it in relevant and personal terms, in a kind way, with non-judgmental way. But it definitely has in it that our potential is more than we think it has. And stop at that point. Where it can get more problematic is if you start forcing it on people or imposing it and saying, why don't you live up to this one? You know, we're all adults, and therefore making this disclaimer is essentially saying that you're going to hear things that may be more than you think you have inside of you, but the result is that you will perhaps be greater than you could think you can be. But I also say that you are an adult, and I'm not taking any responsibility if you don't always find the tools for it. Again, I'm not saying this for legal purposes. No one told me I have to make this statement. I'm really saying it because what I'm trying to say is it takes two to tango. I know from my own life experience. Now, I'll just give an example. I had the great privilege to work many years for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who is a true sage, a true holy man. I have no doubt about it. I'm a skeptic as anybody is, and I observed it and I tested it. I'm not saying this to sell him to you, I'm just saying that it satisfied my skepticism. But what I learned in the process was that as much as I had the privilege to write his talks, ask questions, work closely, I had to work harder as a result of that relationship, not easier. It wasn't easy at all, because the Rebbe, that's where I really saw the difference between a real person and a con artist, or someone it was not about him, it was about me. The more I got involved, the more committed I became, the more responsible I became, and the more mature I became. So imagine having a mentor that in the beginning you think, oh wow, great, I have this great mentor, he's going to answer my questions, he has access to the deepest wisdoms, he's a sage and mystic that goes back thousands of years in an unbroken chain all the way to Moses. You got it all, right? It sounds very, I tell people, they say, wow, I wish I had that. I say, I don't know if you want to wish that. Not to say it's not a blessing, but trust me, that came with serious commitments that I sometimes took back. You can't take the what is it, the blue pill afterwards once you see it, or the red pill. It changes your life. And I say it as a gift. I would not do it. I wouldn't make a decision differently. But if you think seeing greatness or being exposed to things that are deeper than you'll ever imagine, if you think that makes things easier, it will make your life harder, never easier. However, it will make it harder with blessed things instead of harder with unblessed things. So what I will say to you is the beauty of this is that we all are going to have challenges in life, and there are going to be many things that become very difficult. But the question is, what are you going to struggle with? Are you going to struggle with demons and ghosts and psychological insecurities and fears that go back through all your past experiences all the way to your childhood? Or are you going to struggle to reach a potential you never thought you could have? And that is a choice all of us have. Struggle there will be. So if you think that something's going to happen in your life that suddenly struggles will go away, it's not the way it was meant to be. And anyone that tells you otherwise, whether because they want your donation or for other reasons, is simply deceptive. It's not truth. That's why in the Torah there's no magic promises, there's no magic pills. It says very clearly, God put you on this earth and He gave you a divine power. You are godly and you have godly powers. You're not just a subject or a servant to a great master. You are godly yourself. And will you reveal that godly part of yourself or will you not? So you think, oh wow, I feel godly, that should make us arrogant. It doesn't. It's like what God says to Moses. I've given you greatness, not for you, but for them. So what happens is the more you discover your own great potential, the more possibility for pain. But you're also then living up to what your destiny is like. So if we talk about destiny, let's discuss destiny. Because it's not just about are some of us destined to find love in our lives. It's all our destinies. So here you have a contradiction. On one hand, we're told, Ein mazel Yisrael, it says. That Jews don't have a mazel, are not bound to the stars, the signs. How many of you into signs here? I know. We spoke about it at our tables. The signs, the zodiac, the horoscope, the signs. Okay. So we say Ein mazel, that we are not bound to the signs. But then we say to each other, mazel tov. You hear that all the time. You know, you should have a good mazel. Someone has a simcha, gets engaged, you say mazel tov. Bar mitzvah, mazel tov. Bar bris, mazel tov, everywhere you say mazel. Right? It's a common word. It's so common, everyone's using it all the time. And we also know every month has its mazel. For example, the month of Adar, the famous month of Adar, is a mazel of simcha, of joy. Pisces, fish. There's the mazel of this month, is Virgo, is the mazel of love. And there's the mazel next month is the month of judgment, so it's the mazel of Libra, right? Scales. Right. And it's not just in secular literature; it's in the Torah, in the Talmud, in other places. People born in different mazel has a different influence on them, and so on. So which one is it? So we have a verse in the Torah. There's actually a verse in Tanakh that says, "Do not feel bound. You're not bound by the cosmos and by the movements of the celestial bodies." And when it says about and so how do we reconcile these two sides of things? So you have the story of Abraham. We all know Abraham began his life. His name was Avraham. Abraham without a H, without a Hey. And then God adds the letter Hey to his name, and it becomes from Abraham becomes Abraham, or in Hebrew Avram, Avraham. And when God changes the name, it's because of Abraham's maturity and growth. Not to suggest his previous name, as a matter of fact, has great meaning in it. The mystics explain that Avram refers to a dimension that is transcendent. Avram. Av is like father, which refers to Chokhmah in the mystical spheres. And Ram means Remimus, which means exalted or transcendent. So it refers to a very transcendent dimension. Abraham becomes a father of nations. The Hey is how Abraham manifests and already gets connected to other people. So in a way you could say Avram, earlier name was higher than the next one, but it's not the case. Because one of the statements made is that God says, until now, your greatness was determined by the cosmos, by the stars, by your nature, by your personality. And now I'm giving you the power. Avram, which means I give you the power to transcend even your own personality and even the stars themselves. So in other words, there are both dimensions, both have legitimacy. Both are real. The fact is, each of us is born with a personality. That's not a question. And it's genetic. To some areas, absolutely genetic and hereditary. You see, people have certain tendencies from their parents. Even children who, for whatever, God forbid, reason, are torn away or not living, or very early on, as soon as they're born, away from their parents, so you cannot attribute it to the conditions of their home. You find later have very similar streaks and personalities to brothers and sisters, even though they didn't live with them. You meet cousins that didn't live in the same country. I mean, I met my cousins, I have cousins, my father's cousins. Completely different culture, different environment, and such similarities, there's no question it's genetic. So we all have a defined personality. No different than we all have a color of our eyes, a color of hair, or other physical features that you just cannot change. I mean, I'm not talking about cosmetic changes. We're talking about... So, that's not deniable. The question, however, is, how bound are we to these features? How much does it define our lives? So that's where we have choice. You can be trapped by them, which means all you will be is what your features or your personality, genetic personality, dictates. And that may be for good or for bad. There are genetic features that we all have that we inherit that are very beautiful ones. And there's some that are not so beautiful. That's who you will be, playing out that script, your genetic blueprint, so to speak. Or you have the power, as with Abraham, is to transcend. This doesn't mean that your personality suddenly changes, your colors change. It means that you are not a slave to them, and that you have the ability to make choices. So though some people are born, for instance, more intellectually inclined and others more emotionally inclined, that's not a bad or good thing. It really depends what you do with it. Now that's a statement that sounds so simple, but it's not at all that simple, because it's so much easier, and because we're subjective, we often use it as a crutch or an excuse. That's who I am, that's how I am. Well, from the Torah point of view, there's no such excuse. Unequivocally no such excuse when it comes to choices of good or of doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Yes, no one demands a person who's has a certain type of personality has to change their personality. But that personality dictates that you're going to be a better person or a worse person. So Maimonides puts it this way. He says, a strong and absolute foundation in Judaism is that though we are born with different features and different opportunities, some born into poverty, some into wealth, some born tall, some short, some strong, some weak. And he gives other examples like that. He says, however, it all stops by the door of free choice. When it comes to what you're going to choose to do, that was not predestined. No one wrote a script. And all your features do not dictate one way or the other. You can be tall and a good person. You can be tall and not such a good person. You can be born with prosperity, with all the gifts, all the opportunities. Never have a challenge, physical, material challenge in your life, and be a miserable human being. And you can be born in absolute poverty and be a refined, beautiful human being. These features, personalities, or life conditions don't dictate what we will be like. And this is critical. Because what happened on Rosh Hashanah? On Rosh Hashanah it states that God, go back to the birthday. It says, God took earth from the ground, off from in Adama. And Vayipach ba'apa of Nishmas Chaim, shaped it into a body, and he blew into it, literally from his breath, God's breath, a breath of life which is called neshama, the soul. Neshama also means neshima, breath. And suddenly, from this inanimate block of clay, became a living human being. Okay. So what we have here is the essence of life. The clay or the earth is what it is. You cannot change the personality of a piece of dust, dust from the earth. However, once a soul was blown into it, now it has a soul. The soul is B'Tselem Elokim, which means in the divine image. And now you're no longer shaped by nature. You have a part of me, God is saying. And just as I am not bound by any laws of nature, neither are you. And your choice is going to be this. Are you going to follow the forces that dictate your nature? Or are you going to follow the divine forces that are not dictated by your nature? This is a choice we make all the time. It's the choice of being noble or being selfish. You see this all the time. You see people in situations where one person took care of themselves, as embarrassing as it was, and the other did the noble thing. What's the difference? When you study the difference between these two people, and many studies have been made, scientists love to study things, tell me if they ever come to any conclusion with that. They try to find whether there's nobility in the genes, or nobility in the upbringing. Because from an evolutionary point of view, if nobility, as the evolutionary theorists like to put it, is by being good to each other, it's good for the species, because when we support each other, then everybody should be that way. So that theory doesn't also work. You see, one person will be noble, one will not. From a Torah point of view, the answer is choice. You made a choice. And that choice may be influenced by things. But remember, when people, God forbid, are tortured, or when self-preservation is on the line, suddenly a lot of things that we've been conditioned fall away. You see how people have done to each other when they suddenly are hungry, and they can turn on each other and turn to cannibalism, something you'd never imagine. None of us should ever be tested. But there is a choice, because there are people who are tested like that and did not turn to cannibalism. So that means that we have unbelievable potential on one end, and we have the other. So to make a statement that I am bound to one or the other because I have fleshy needs or selfish needs is, yes, you can choose to lean toward that side of your personality, but you also have another one that is not bound by the mazel. So when we say mazel tov, what we're really saying is, may the transcendent dimension that's beyond mazel also permeate your mazel, that it should also be good. We're not trying to say that our personality should change or the mazel with which we were born should change. We're saying is that you're not bound by it. It does not control your life. It's what we call a predisposition, a leaning. And our challenge is to channel it. So to answer the question about whether some of us are destined for love or not, any honest person has to first of all say, just because your life experiences are such that love has come difficult to you, and every time you tried it, it hasn't worked, to come to a conclusion that you're destined is a pretty strong statement. None of us are God. We don't know our destinies. So all we can say is, it's hard for me. That's all I can say. That's what a humble person answers. Now remember, if you decide to write your script, that because it's been difficult for me to find love till this point, I'm now convinced that I will never find it. Then you have basically made your choice. So you have chosen your destiny. In other words, we can't control our destiny. You can control your destiny, that your destiny will control you. You chose that. You chose the path of, let's call it, of the road not less traveled, the road more traveled, that the circumstances of your life dictate the rest of your life. So a person's, let's say, traveling this way, and they keep going. You've chosen, this is what's been till now. I choose to continue. How you can face God on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and ask for something new is interesting. I would like to hear somebody who's chosen that path. So why would God, you've already written your destiny. You say that certain things are not possible. So there's an unequivocal answer without any ambiguity, is that there's no such thing as a person who's destined not to have love in their life. You would not have been sent to this earth for the purpose to create echad, and say echad, and bring unity and love in this world if you would not have the ability to find love. That you may have a difficulty, that if you've never seen love in your life because your parents were monsters, or other things in your life that happen that block it or make it very difficult, that doesn't mean you don't have that destiny. It just means that you were, for some reason, have greater challenges in that direction. But to write a script and close the story that this is not for me, I, for one, everything that I've learned absolutely rejects that. So if you think you're going to hear sympathy from me that in that direction, that's not where I'm going. Now, if you think about it, you'll say, well, I know. I've said this to some people. They said, you dashed all my hopes because they thought I would agree with them after hearing their story that there's no way I'm going to find love. So I said, if you want me to acquiesce and agree with you, you're basically telling me I should not think that you have any more potential. So of course the smart person answers, no, find potential in other areas, not this area. I have other potential in other areas. Yeah, but if you convince yourself that you don't have potential in one area, how do we know we're not going to convince ourselves? Subjectivity has taken over here, basically. You're not coming to me to hear, I agree with you. You're coming to me to hear another opinion that may not agree with you. But the fact is, truth be told, how many of us really want to hear something we don't like? We want to hear that we confirm. And not because we're bad people. That too is part of human nature. That's the dust part of your body. That's how bodies work. That's how materialism works. Nature works that way. Lepers don't change their spots. The sun will always rise the same way. So the sun, we're not talking, if you're talking to the sun's not going to come to you for another opinion. Maybe I shouldn't rise today. That's its nature. That's its script. That's the program that it has to follow. We humans do not have that same type of situation. There's a part of us that's like that. As it says in the Talmud, that there are three things in a human being that were like animals, and there are three things in a human being that were like angels. So eating, sleeping, breeding, similar to animals. Angels is our ability to choose to be good. And other things that the Talmud describes there. Basically, transcendent experiences. And you can choose. And they're both right. If you chose the path of so-called nature and sticking to that script, that's also part of you. So it's not like you went against yourself, but basically what you did is cut off a whole other part of yourself. So the reason we have a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is first and foremost to know you have another part of yourself. And that's what we're trying to access. As I've often said here, King Solomon's words, a generation comes and a generation goes, and there's nothing new under the sun. Very depressing. It basically means the more you do, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So why bother? Why make any effort? It's all the same story at the end anyway. We all die. The worms, or whatever, not to get too graphic, attack all of us, no matter how good of a person. Even though it does say tzaddikim are intact. Okay, but we know that's probably not going to be our case. Right? So why bother? It's a good question. I've asked this question to many people. Your child comes to you. Well, not your child. You ask yourself this question. Why bother to be a better person when we see the good don't always prosper, or actually the wicked prosper and the good sometimes suffer? Why bother? So it's one thing in public, everybody's watching you, so it doesn't look good. But why should we fundamentally make kinder choices, more sensitive choices, when we may be giving up something, our own comforts, our own money, our own whatever it may be? It's maybe the simplest question you'll ever hear. I've never heard an answer except the following one. And I looked, and I tried to, so the common answers you'll get are this. It's just the right thing to do. Whatever that means. Okay. So maybe some people accept that, fine. But some people won't accept that answer. The next one is, God wants you to be kind. It's a mitzvah. Again, some may accept that, some may not accept it. To make the question more, to drive the point home, at the end of the day, we will all die. The good or not such good people. The same thing will happen to us, to all of us. So of course then there's the religious answer. Well, there's eternal reward and punishment, hell and heaven. The only answer that I find, and this is the answer of Judaism, is because your goodness does not die with you. The kind things you do today live forever and change the world forever. Which is why we believe in a Mashiach. What do you think really the belief of a destination is? It's not just some type of messianic belief that God's going to come and do some great things. It's the belief that the prices paid by human beings in our time and by our parents and grandparents did not die. They're building blocks that change the world forever, refine the world, and when these building blocks accumulate, there will be cosmic change to this universe. Not apocalypse, a good change. So it means goodness accumulates even if you don't see it. It's essentially believing that every good act releases a spiritual energy that changes things forever, in you and in others. And it's not just because it's convenient or because you get awards or because it feels good to do good things. Maybe those are also ulterior motives, but ultimately because there's some higher purpose. So in Rosh Hashanah we have this choice, and that's why we have a Rosh Hashanah. Every year again, you're going to be asked this question: which path do you choose? The dust of the earth, which is the material human being, or the soul that was blown into you, which has the power infused inside of you, that has the power to transcend your nature. So the more you're convinced that you will never find love in your life, the more Rosh Hashanah challenges you and says, you don't know your destiny, and it makes no difference what happened yesterday, and your circumstances. There are powers that are more powerful than you know, within you too. And what do you expect of yourself? More or less? And if every Rosh Hashanah it goes down a notch, what can I say? Achenveh, they say in Yiddish. It's not a good sign. You'd like it to go up a notch, not down a notch. Even though, I remember when I turned, I don't know, was it 30? Someone said, well, it's all downhill from here. The guy tells me. Very life-affirming. I meet him from time to time. He's like 10 years older than I am. And, unfortunately, he's chosen that path. And I've hopefully chosen another path. But it's a choice we make. And this has a lot to do with your own spirit and who you hang around with. Because in a way, it's much easier, of course, option one. Less expectations of yourself, less pain in a way, less work, and you have ultimately the fundamental smokescreen that really is an excuse for everything. It's not going to be, that's not my script. Now, obviously, we're not talking about destiny, things that we cannot change. We can't turn the clock back. Certain things will not change physically. But that doesn't mean that you can't find many, many things that you may have given up on. So Rosh Hashanah, if it's anything, it's that opportunity to open up a new door. And new really doesn't mean new like completely new. It means new in your attitude. That it may be inside of you, you just never let it out. So that's the answer to that question. As far as the issue of Netzavim-Vayelech goes, which is directly connected to this as well. Look at a tree. A tree is the only thing in the universe that grows in two directions at once. And they're interdependent. For the higher a tree to grow, the deeper its roots have to be. You some way sever the roots and somewhere compromise them, the tree will be compromised on all levels. You'll see birds in nature. The ones that fly the farthest are the ones that have the most secure nest. So the paradox of life really is exactly Netzavim-Vayelech. And you'll see where the trap is, why we find it to be a paradox. It's not just in Far Eastern mysticism, but also Jewish mysticism teaches that ultimately you come to a point where a paradox is not a paradox. I'll explain that in a moment, but first let me go back to this. So you see in nature that on one hand you have to have a very strong foundation for something to grow. On the other hand, if you only have the foundation, as I mentioned earlier, it can be very monotonous and boring. It doesn't really work well for having a vibrant, dynamic experience. So we, in our so-called, I don't know, called lazy, but easier approach, when you can't have both, you choose whatever you need at that moment. I need commitment now. I'll look for that a little. That doesn't work. I'll look for a little excitement. Some cultures actually say, around marriage and love, that you need both. That's why you need a mistress. Ask some Frenchmen. No, the real culture is built on that. It's not such a funny thing. And they have a good case. They say, look, you need a wife for the consistency and for the image in society. But for adventure and excitement, you need something else on the side. I'm not talking now from a Torah concept or from a Torah context or not. The argument can be made. You can make a strong argument. How you can't have both. Now, the truth is you can't have both when you think like a human being, but not like you think like a god. When you don't have a soul, it's true. It doesn't seem possible. It just doesn't make it's not logical. Anything you get too accustomed to, because you're committed to it or it's committed to you, will also have the other side of it that won't be so exciting. So you have all the different therapists and writers and so on that try to create excitement within the context of monogamy or whatever you want to call it. Whether it works or not, I can't tell you. I don't know whether they're all right, But the point I'm trying to make is that it's all bound by laws that we have dictated, our own expectations of ourselves. So comes this week's chapter and says the following. If you introduce a dimension that's not about you, and there's something higher to the whole picture, why is there a contradiction between having something that is a strong foundation, at the same time something that is constantly growing? People can have a very strong commitment to each other, and if they're secure, that commitment allows them to explore in many ways without compromising their commitment. It's not common, because we get trapped by life. What do you think creates monotony? You think it's commitment that creates monotony? Monotony is created by people who don't have anything that stimulates them, to excite them. So obviously whatever is common is going to become monotonous. But if a person's spirit is alive, it's your spirit that creates energy. And a relationship, we're talking about love, two people, and I've seen this, it's not common, people who lived and loved each other for 60, 70 years, older couples. And you talk to them, and you see love that they had when they were younger and how they have it today. You'll see it's all about transcendence. It's not because they happened to find their soulmate. It's because both of them had a transcendent element that didn't let the circumstances of the mazel, so to speak, affect their relationship. They had something that was more powerful than just their needs, to put it bluntly. Which is, as I often put about relationships, the 4 levels of compatibility. So you have physical compatibility, 2 people are attracted to each other. Which of course is a necessity. You can't have a relationship with someone you're repulsed by, I think. The second level is an emotional compatibility. Not just attracted, but there's some emotional connection. You can be attracted to certain people, they look beautiful on paper, but there's no emotional charge. And the third is intellectual compatibility, 2 people who share ideas, stimulate, intellectually explore. So if you had all those 3, like somebody told me, had all those 3, that's like that would be a miracle. If I have 1 out of the 3, I'm happy. 2 out of the 3 is like excellent. 3 out of the 3, impossible. I've heard this from quite a few people. So since it's already impossible, might as well add a 4th one, just to make it a little more complicated. And the 4th one is the only one that is enduring, as you'll see in a moment. The 4th is spiritual compatibility. What does that mean? To go back again. If we are 2 bodies, God blew the soul, infused us each with the soul, so 2 bodies come together. So of course, everything in the material world changes. As we age, our looks change, our ideas change, our feelings change, our needs change. There's nothing in this world that's not changing. Everything is mortal, everything ages, everything deteriorates. So why should we be different? So Rosh Hashanah answers, well, you also have a soul. That's when on that Friday, that first Rosh Hashanah in history, God put a soul inside of you. And a soul does not age. A soul is not affected by age, because it wasn't born, doesn't die. Yes, it's trapped in your body and locked in your body, but you can release it. And spiritual compatibility, in simpler terms, means 2 people who share a vision together. See, the first 3 are great, important. You're attracted to someone. You emotionally connect, intellectually connect. But as I said, firstly, all those things change. And secondly, they're all driven by a need. So as the need changes, the need for the person that's fulfilling it will change, and you'll maybe find someone else who's more attractive, or more emotionally passionate, or more intellectually stimulating. Nothing that's not so irregular. However, if 2 people share a vision, what means a vision? They know they came down to earth here for something more than just their own needs. What kind of home they'll build, what kind of children they'll bring into this world, if God blesses them with children. Now, obviously, if you don't have a vision, this 4th dimension doesn't seem to work. But the point I'm making here is that Rosh Hashanah is an opportunity to ask yourself, what is the vision? Because I think that's the biggest problem. We don't have a vision. So we are left to our own resources, only the first 3 things. That's the only thing we know about a relationship. That's why I said earlier, what the question really here is much more not how do you find love, what is love? If you don't feel love needs a vision, or that spiritual dimension that I just said, then we're definitely on two different pages, and then it's a whole different discussion. But I believe, instead of me coming down and saying, okay, let's figure out those three dimensions and how to make that better, maybe we have to introduce a fourth dimension. And again, it does not compromise the first three. It adds something. I've studied this. I've spoken to a couple, that God bless them with many years. They're close to 90 years old today. I don't know if it's blessed because of this. And I talked to them at length. And I mean, it was almost impossible to get anything out of them, because people who are happy don't talk about it. You know, it wasn't like you could get anything. They say, I don't know, we didn't do anything special. I mean, he said, well, when she wanted something, I just didn't argue. That added a few years, he felt. I mean, they came down to these like almost humorous little things, but it's much deeper than that, because you see, a foundation of a building is not very dramatic. If a foundation of this building gave you an interview, it wouldn't be dramatic. What you ask the foundation, listen, tell me, what do you do all day beneath the ground that keeps this building standing? And he said, not much. I'm just there. I don't go anywhere. You know, and what happened? It's very undramatic. It's not even very beautiful, because if you look at foundations, when you see these buildings, they dig them, they don't have anything that's very impressive. But without it, it doesn't work. So what is the foundation in love? It's something that's not exactly dramatic. You see, the dramatics happen on the other three levels. Not to take away from them, but fireworks in general are not where the foundations are built. Fireworks are good for the adventure, as I'm saying. But foundations are actually, you don't compliment the building and say, oh, the foundation is such a great foundation. You say, beautiful furniture, the lighting is great, the paintings on the wall, everything that's actually unnecessary. The necessary things are not even just talked about. That just shows us who we are. See, we're focused on that. And in the world of marketing, we're told that's what it's all about. So again, I don't take away from any of that. You need all that, Vayelech. But when the other part is missing, you don't have endurance and you don't have eternity. When we bless each other, we say, Binyan Adayad is the greatest blessing you can give a new couple. You shall build an eternal edifice, that one that will be forever. Forever? That's a big, big blessing. How many things are forever? The forever comes from the soul. And that's Rosh Hashanah's ultimate message to us. That you have a soul, and that soul has a reservoir of power much more than you'll ever imagine. And that never ever give up on, because if you give up on that, you might as well give up on everything. You know, I deal with different therapists, and either sending clients. So I always look for good ones. I remember having a conversation with one that was considered a very good therapist, but she didn't believe that human beings have a soul. And this wasn't a religious debate. So I said to her, if you don't think a human being has a soul, why are you taking $200 an hour? For what? You know, so first she put it into sophisticated terms. When it came down to it, she said, people are lonely and they're ready to pay $200 to have someone to talk to. And that's the time. And time is valuable. It wasn't. She never didn't say it quite that way. I'm not mentioning names, so you know. But that's what it came. I said, do you believe in the power of healing? Can a person heal? And I mean healing, whether you're bleeding and then the blood clots and you're healed. Spiritually, psychologically. And she said, some people I don't think can heal. Certain things cannot. So I said, and would you take that person as a client? I said, if there was benefit in our communication. In other words, it was one of those, I'm not suing her, so she'll have all the right answers. Remember, adults are adults. You're paying somebody even if they don't do anything for you. You're paying them. That's your problem. But it was interesting to me. It wasn't really a critique of her. I realized where she was coming from. I mean, bending over backwards that some therapists have is that we can't get into ethical choices of our clients. We can't be judgmental. And I'm not of a believer that you should be. And I don't think even a religious therapist should bring their religion into it. It's not about that. It's the question whether the person that's sitting there has a spirit that's more than what was broken in their lives. Or as one of the Rebbe said, anything that can be broken can be fixed. If something happened in your life that was a traumatic experience, can you transcend it, or are you forever changed? Or rather, not forever changed, but forever unable to achieve certain things? Can you create bypass surgery, so to speak? Can you discover new tools? That, for me, was the problem. It wasn't the problem. I don't really care about the religious part. If you don't believe in that, then why would someone come to you? Why are you doing that? So, To me, it comes down to, if you talk about it in Rosh Hashanah terms, that Rosh Hashanah that's its message. Each of us has a unique soul. I would say maybe 1-2% of that soul has been revealed in your life. And it's up to you. The more that will come out of it, the more, let's put it this way, the more percentage of your soul that's revealed, the more hope you'll have, the more power to find love, and the more power that you will attract love. See, one piece of dust is not interested in another piece of dust. Okay? Meaning that the human being is made of a body, the dust of the earth. But souls are interested in souls. Love is direct proportion to a person's spirit. And when I say soul and spirit, I don't mean it in how many mitzvahs you do. That's not what we're talking about. Mitzvahs are meant to bring your soul alive, or let's put it this way, fan the flames of your pilot flame. But the soul inside of you you were born with. But we're born with it in a way that it's trapped inside of our lives. And I say the word trapped, Michelangelo's statement, an angel trapped in the marble, and we have to carve to set her free. And every Rosh Hashanah, a new energy comes into existence that helps us carve. But you have to do the carving. You have to allow it out. And it has a lot to do with what you expect of yourself. God is not going to give you something. Well, He may give you, but imagine giving you a gift that you don't even want. Or giving you a gift that you don't feel you can never do anything with. That's really what it comes down to. That's what I find. Many people who have struggles in finding a loving relationship, it's not about what you've done or what you haven't done. It's what you expect and what you see as what love is and the potential of love. So how do we get to that vision of love? That'll be the theme for next week's discussion. Look, this does not mean the punchline was not stated here. Plenty of punchlines were stated here. If you guys can implement what I said here, if I could implement it, we'd be in good shape. We've got plenty doing it. Look, this is not a short-term solutions here. We're talking about how to, let's put it this way, open up in ourselves new reservoirs, new channels, new possibilities, basically. And that's the challenge. So the Netzavim-Vayelech dimension teaches us that there's something beyond foundations and beyond growth, and that is our higher purpose. When that's there, the commitment and that mobility that I mentioned are not a contradiction. They're not paradoxes. That's why in the mystical journey, there's a point where you come that a paradox is not a paradox, because paradoxes only exist in the world of logic. If you bind yourself to mathematical formulas and to so-called logical and material equations, there are many paradoxes. When you get to certain stages in life, there are no paradoxes, because all these definitions are not the end of the story. Definitions themselves were put into place. We have the power to transcend to a place that's beyond definitions. So I wish upon all of us to find somebody in our lives that can help you and you help them get to that place beyond definitions. So I want to say is this, since some of you have also asked and it's coming closer to it, to Rosh Hashanah, everything I said here this evening, he wants me to say something, but he doesn't know what we want. It's okay. I would know. Great. So everything I said here this evening, which hopefully came from my heart, is really my own so-called work of trying to discover the deeper meaning of the high holidays. For me, it's the highlight of the year in the Jewish calendar. At the same time, when something is a highlight, you have expectations of it, and it doesn't deliver, it's quite that would be a reflection of something we call bankruptcy. It's not an accident that the synagogue attendance wanes from year to year, and it's not an accident that most sermons are about that subject. Not that it brings everybody back, but people tell me they go to the synagogue, all they hear is, "How come you don't come more?" And instead of looking at ourselves, meaning the rabbis looking at themselves, we live in a world, in America they say the customer is always right. In Israel, actually, they say the customer is always wrong. But here, the customer is always right. So if the customers are not returning, maybe something's not being delivered that's proper. So I would love to hear the rabbi that would get up in a sermon and talk about himself, how he has failed his congregation. You're not going to have many do that. I, in a way, copped out a different direction by choosing not to have a pulpit, because I didn't want to get involved in synagogue politics and bureaucracies, and that whole dimension that I know is so undermining of the spirituality. To me, a house of God, which is a synagogue, a mikdash mat, is a mini sanctuary. It's like a temple. A house of God is anything but bureaucracy. It should be a place where everybody's welcome, no matter how they're dressed, no matter what they believe or don't believe, no matter what they do or they don't do. And the only place that exists somewhat little like that is maybe the kotel. You go there Friday night, almost everybody's welcome. I mean, everybody is welcome, and you have different types of minions. And there's a certain beauty to it, even though they don't talk to each other, and then some probably think the other person's Judaism isn't worth much, but they're there. Maybe there's no physical structure. The only other place where I really felt it in my own life was when we did those weekends, those camping weekends. Remember that? Because there were no buildings. And I suddenly felt maybe that's why the Arizal, the Holy Arizal, and the Baal Shem Tov chose to pray in the fields. Maybe they didn't want to be bound by human structures, physical walls. They tend to create a certain artificiality. It's good for operas, and it's good for theater, maybe, and for movies. You can't just do that. You have theater in the park, I guess, but you know what I mean. And so physical structures, in a way, undermine it. So I've never really found a synagogue myself that had that ability to really be that all-inclusiveness. And maybe when I was younger, I avoided, therefore, going there because I don't know if I could create something like that. But being that, as we said, we have to take on new, bolder risks, and I've chosen to take on a bolder risk. And I began the last few years trying to do high holidays. And that's, of course, the hardest one of all because it's the one the most expectations are there. And I have to say, I don't know if any of you were here last year, Yom Kippur. I did it right here at the service. And it was like a room of 200 people. I mean, we filled the maximum. We couldn't really, no one else could really get in. And just spontaneous, I didn't really plan it. But I began before the Kol Nidre service. People, there's a certain, even, everybody has some receptivity at that point. The holiest night of the year, it just has a certain, even in the culture, it has a certain impact. I mean, I don't want to dismiss it to being that Kol Nidre is the first song ever sung on a talkie movie. Al Jolson, the jazz singer. So I don't know if it's a Jewish conspiracy that the first song they made sure was Kol Nidre, that movie, the jazz singer. But long before that movie, Kol Nidre always had this impact. And I remember sitting here, or standing here in front of the room, and people from all walks of life, and I knew many of them, some I didn't know. And I know one thing, I was not going to allow Yom Kippur to pass without challenging myself and everybody to reach a deeper dimension. Now we're talking before the holiday, but when it comes to the holiday, then definitely I wasn't going to do that. So just spontaneously, I opened up by saying that I want to fulfill a custom that I grew up with as a child, that every Yom Kippur, before Kol Nidre, before the holiday began, my father would bless me, my siblings. And then later, when I got a little older, as a student, the Rebbe, who had none of his own biological children, would bless the students. And it was like awesome moment. No words to describe it. The connection that you feel then. So I said, I'd like to open up with a blessing for anyone here that was not blessed to have parents that blessed them, and or worse than that. I'd like to open up with a blessing. And I cannot tell you how the room changed. Anyone was here? You remember? It was like, besides the tears that you heard, I'm talking about a lot of people who did not go to synagogue. I know people who never came even to Yom Kippur in a synagogue. And I didn't do it for effect. I did it because I did it from my heart. And it was unbelievable. It changed everything. The Kol Nidre, we did the service. I mean, we did the whole service, but I explained everything. It was all very hands-on, very personalized. And what was it, like 6 o'clock it began? I think 8 o'clock it was over. It was about 2 hours. People were not always used to it. But everyone stayed. But more importantly, what blew me away was 8 o'clock came. You'd think 2 hours of, as I explained it. We sang. It was a meaningful prayer service. It wasn't just mechanical by rote. But 8 o'clock came, not one person stood up. I mean it. And I thought, 8 o'clock, people, they're out of here. Yom Kippur, there's other things to do, or whatever, the service is over. I was really moved by that. Because I saw that when you touch people in a place that touches their heart and transcends even tradition and the prayers, the impact of that is, no words for it. I have been transformed by that. Maybe even more than all the people that were here Yom Kippur. So I felt for the first time, well, it wasn't the first time that I did it. I did do it in Santa Monica with a similar effect. But for the first time I felt, here within walls, we're able to achieve something like that. And afterwards we had like a discussion. I think 75% of the people stayed, just questions and answers. It was very interesting, very unique. It was not the conventional Yom Kippur experience, that I can tell you. Now, I say this is an advertisement basically. What do they call it? And the truth is, I'm sharing it really personally speaking. If anyone here or anybody that you know wants to have some type of experience like that, that's what I'm going to do here. Promise, guaranteed. That's my promise. I just want to add that money should not be a factor. We're not going to turn anybody away because of money. Obviously, we have a certain request, but it's all what you'd like to give. Or don't want. If a person can't, you don't have to feel embarrassed. So you can feel free to call my office. So that should not be any way to hold anyone up. And more importantly, not more importantly, as importantly, to yourself, anyone here that has people that you know that may not be interested in doing something, this may be something that if you brought them or you suggested it, they would maybe try it. What do you got to lose? So I'm just encouraging, since it's a week from Rosh Hashanah, a little more than a week, and Yom Kippur another week after that. I just want to let that out there, and I say it also to the web audience. We're not going to have the web, however, live on Yom Kippur night. So I want to just say with that, we will have another class next Wednesday night. And that will be like the final class before Rosh Hashanah. Continue on this theme, a little more to the vision thing. And finally, the blessing, I shall conclude with what I began. May everybody have a very blessed year. And the channels we talked about should open with the least amount of effort, but obviously the more effort we put, the better it will be. And it should be a blessing that we should have a healthy year for ourselves, those of us that have children or grandchildren, and finding love in our lives and building it, and maybe focusing on what we were really sent to be on this earth instead of many of the sideshows that keep us so distracted. So everyone have a very good night, and again, anyone needs anything personal for myself, you can speak to me or Velvel. I don't know if he's here. I think he had to go away. Right. Okay. But you can feel free to speak to me or call my office. I know people who have asked to see me personally. I actually do make time, usually on Wednesdays before the class. I come here early. So if anybody wants to see me personally, just call my office and you can schedule something. Making it very easy. It's my from the new resolutions of MLC at 6 there. And also welcome any suggestions you may have. We're growing here. Thank God things are developing. Maybe that's what he wanted me to announce. And we're working well here with the hosts, which is the synagogue here, as you see from our expanded activities. But if anyone has any ideas, like we had a few weeks ago, Maya Batash showed her film here with a discussion, whether it's classes or ideas for cultural programming or emerging artists, anything that may come your way, even if it sounds crazy or wild, don't be afraid to share it. And with that, tomorrow night, Philip will be giving his unique class. Philip Nammerworth, singer-songwriter, a long-term student of mine. And good night, everybody. We'll take a little break from one gathering to the next. Okay.